Hello, good evening all. My name is Noor Chester. I would like to throw this question to Miss O'Brady and Miss Pargass. My question concerns the responsibility of society and the use of technology to aid in the elimination of violence against women. I could recall that Ms. Pargass mentioned that one of two of the limitations when it comes to our legal framework, domestic violence legal framework, stems from the lack of evidence and basically the victims feeling intimidated. But recently, just last month, we would have had a situation where even though this well-known case, the person was feeling intimidated, she would have gone to the police station on several occasions to make a report. In addition to that, where there would have been a case of lack of evidence, we would have seen it all in our Facebook accounts, several pictures of the victim being actually victimized. Everybody know what I'm talking about, right? And what amazed me, instead of technology coming to her aid, about a week after, the technology completely worked against her. Because a week after, we were just simply distracted by the battle of the media houses. One personality versus another. Memes all over the place that has nothing to do with domestic violence. The real issue had to do with something else. The comparison of one person's masculinity versus another type of masculinity, instead of the key issue. A woman was actually victimized by a close relation. So I would like to know how we could actually use technology to effectively aid in the elimination of violence against women. Because I will say for her situation, the distraction less than a week after, it really didn't work in her case. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Abdul Mohammed, a law student. When looking at the domestic legislation that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, I always find it most useful in any area where we're criticizing the domestic legislation to look at the international standards that exist. International standards have always been more progressive than domestic standards, and that's where our new domestic legislation comes from. We draw on the international standards that exist. And in light of that, something that is very real is generational trauma. So we ask ourselves why gender discrimination and gender violence exists on a generational scale. So from the dawn of man until right now today. And in order to remove this or to effectively act against gender discrimination, I think we have to start at the lowest level of our being, and that is being a child. So I think Ms. Pargass is right by linking it to the Children's Act and trying to take it on that level, the Children's Authority Act, to address gender discrimination by developing how a child thinks and then eventually growing up into how they are as a functioning social being. But in my examination of at least the Children's Authorities Act, which was developed to bring Trinidad standards up to the levels of the CRC, the International Covenant on Children's Rights. The Children's Authorities Act itself, while it may be progressive in a sense, I don't believe it has reached a standard to be able to issue the types of protections and types of rights that children need in order to inspire this wider scale change. And while we may be comfortable by saying it's progressive now, significant change significant development is needed in order to cover all those gaps. I just wanted to say that.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marlon Bascom. I just wanted to reinforce what my brother Nick was saying, as well as to touch on what some of Levi was saying with respect to reconstructing how we change ideas of masculinity. Firstly, I think we need to have in Trinidad and Tobago a reality check as to where we are with our young people, because the attitudes of our young men towards our young women and vice versa with respect to violence, which is coming out in all different forms, from as young as 8 and 9 in terms of guns and knives, and also the negative attitudes that the young men have towards the young men and vice versa, is something that we need to really recognize the root causes of and really come up with instant workable strategies to deal with. As much as Levi says he wants to have it from the grassroots level, I think we also need to recognize that in many ways the grassroots level is failing us. The community framework just isn't there right now. So they are going to need some form of structured help to address some of the issues that are occurring. Right now I work with some young men in some of these schools, and on the news some of these schools are on TV, some of the young men that have criminal records and so on. And the parents don't know what to do. The communities, the families are, I don't even know the words I want to use in terms of withdrawing into themselves out of fear. So that we need to find a strategy to bring some form of structure from the, whether it's international or institutional frameworks, along with building back up the grassroots level of power to change the mindsets and attitudes that are existing and permeating through our society right now, which we are seeing in the school-based violence as well as in our criminal activity.
Okay, very good.
I'd like to begin by thanking the panel for a very stimulating and relevant discussion, and to thank the European Union for the grant that they've given to the Faculty of Law. I remember Lice Roberts, Deputy in the Faculty of Law. My question and comment is linked to what the first person on this side had raised, the social media incident. And I recall something that happened last year, late last year, on social media, involving violence against a young woman involved in a relationship. She was in a bar, and a young man came and dragged her out and beat her. And after that incident, I followed the case in the newspapers, and I remember it was reported that she did not want to cooperate with the authorities and to give evidence. And there was a lot of speculation as to why. I don't know the outcome of the case, but I was just kind of disturbed that the fact that she did not want to cooperate might be a barrier to foreign prosecution and to something happening. And I think that's a failure in the legal system if the victims don't want to cooperate, which might happen because of all the dynamics in a situation like that, right? And Natalie, you painted a vivid picture about the different issues that can be at stake and involved in these types of situations. So I think even if a victim does not want to cooperate, the law should be able to do something. If you look at cases concerning cruelty to animals, you can bring prosecutions against the perpetrators without the animals cooperating. So with women, this is a serious incident that if you have technology and you have evidence, then something should happen. That's my comment.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for a really great panel discussion. My name is Hassanali, and I am from International Organization for Migration, IRA. And I just have two quick questions. The first one, I think, is Ms. Gaietry. You said that there were no statistics on sexual offenses and their outcomes. Could you elaborate a bit more on that for me, please? And another question, which is operationalizing the conventions and implementing existing national legislation, particularly for criminal justice actors and police officers in particular. You said, I can't remember who said it, but someone said that it may not be a case of more training. Then what is it? Yes, thank you.
Good evening, my name is Sheldon A. Mitchell, and I found it passing strange that no one mentioned the hurdle to this issue of masculinity and what it means in relation to how it impacts on women. No one mentioned religious ideology. That's a very difficult thing to shake. So if you want to talk about doing things, changing society's perception, faith-based kind of ideologies are difficult to shake. So no one mentioned it, I wanted mentioned.
Thank you. I think that was really quite an important point to make. Okay, I hate to do this when the discussion is going so well, but it is 8 o'clock. So I'm going to ask, yeah, we'll start with Natalie, but please respond to the questions and use this also as your opportunity to summarize and say anything that you think you really have to say that you forgot but still be short.
Okay. Thank you for some great questions, Jewel. I will start with you. It's more of a statement that says it may not be a case for just more training, but would have been posited a little differently because we tend to look for one solution. So we tend to think that it's just providing training for the police officers, which are happening now. We tend to think that just having specialized units, which is what's happening now. And we try to do all of these interventions in isolation. And then we find that the issue of violence against women is so dynamic that there will always be an area that we didn't think about and it pops up elsewhere. So we're talking about a comprehensive and a more holistic approach to empowering the various members of our services or response agencies, etc., etc. Ms. Chester, the question about technology, quite honestly, I don't have an answer for you. However, I would say this much. We have a society, we need to understand that technology is actually driven by people. And we have a society that has adopted almost a media-like paradigm about issues where if it bleeds, it leads. So society oftentimes has a great uproar about when they see the child that was killed. And we will scream for 2 days and 3 days, or probably for a week. And then we get quiet. And you only have a few people plodding along in the background to try to sustain momentum or to bring justice or to bring assistance to the victims. And even as we consider going forward with technology, and I would love if you have answers, because we're looking for that, we need to be mindful of who we often get that pushback. And sometimes the pushback could be so toxic. If you look at some of those comments, that I was very concerned about the victim reading some of those comments and its impact. We're talking about secondary traumatization. We're talking about trauma-informed care. We need to keep all of these things in context when we are dealing with these cases of sexual and domestic violence.
Okay, well, I think Natalie addressed the question of the use of technology, except to say that from my perspective, I think technology could be used in a much more positive way by those who have the resources to use it in a positive way to begin to cause the kinds of transformations that we are talking about here in this room. And you know, there are many more experts on that than I am. Social media, of course, has its pitfalls and dangers, and you know, the arguments can go back and forth. The question on the sexual offenses, I think, but essentially what I was saying, and it applies both to sexual offenses and to domestic violence, is that we don't collect the data and the statistics that will allow us to make enlightened and informed policy decisions to deal with violence, to deal with sexual violence or domestic violence. So for example, with sexual offenses, the data that we have on the ground would be reports made to organizations like the Rape Crisis Center. That's self-reporting. Those are self-reports. They're limited. The validity of that data for making any kind of decision about incidence or prevalence, you know, it's not valid for that reason. It's valid for the reason that the Rape Crisis Center needs to use it for, so they collect data according to their needs. The police collect data on sexual offenses, but these are in the main sexual offenses reports. So assuming we have a certain number of sexual offences reports, we need to know how many charges are laid. We also need to know what has happened between the reports and the charges. Have victims dropped out of the system, and why have they dropped out? Now, the police would not necessarily know this, but what I'm saying, there is a need for other kinds of things to happen, like research into that. We need to know those charges, how many of those charges enter the judicial system. And we need to know the dropout rate. The police can provide that. The police can provide dropout rates at any stage, but they are not collecting it. And we need to know, once it enters the judicial system, what are the outcomes? Because almost all sexual offences are charged, what we in law, indictably, so that they have to be heard first in the magistrate's court to determine whether they should go to the High Court for trial. If there are 100 cases or 200 cases entering the judicial system in a particular year, we have no idea what are the outcomes of those 200. We don't even know, there is nowhere documented how those 23, which I just used for 1 year, what is the ratio between those that were sent up for trial and those that actually entered the magistrate's courts. So clearly there are huge gaps in data collection and huge research gaps as well in understanding what is happening to victims along the way. And I think there's only a quick comment on the other question of the law, the Children Act 2012 and the others, the package of legislation, to say that by and large they incorporate the international standards. From my point of view, I think they do. How they are operationalized and the kinds of resources that are allocated to how they are operationalized is really the key question. And I think that's basically, if I've forgotten any of the other questions. What I want to say in closing is that the law can be a powerful tool. How laws are made in Trinidad and Tobago, I know only too well because I've been involved in that area for a long time. I think we are a small society when it comes to the input. When it comes to the input, into how laws are crafted, we need to find mechanisms to involve as many people as possible. Because from my experience, people sit as a team, we engage in public consultations, sometimes we have focus group discussions, and we try in this society, as in many Caribbean jurisdictions, to get the best product possible at the end. But it may not necessarily be, because we do not have always the range of experts that are necessary to craft the law. And I can tell you, crafting the law is a very, very difficult task. It is extremely difficult because it has to incorporate all of that we are saying in this room and try to get the best fix in the law, which is not always possible and can't be possible.
Thank you very much. Levi?
I don't have anything really to add other than I think if you have a vision for a new and dignified world, don't let anyone take it from you. Continue to share your stories and then continue to organize. And then also the last thing I'll say is my humble gratitude for everyone.
So I guess I also just wanted to speak really quickly to the point about operationalizing international standards. And in fact, international standards, many of the treaties out there.
I didn't turn it off, I swear.
That in fact, operationalizing the law is an international obligation, right? So, going back to kind of how we're going to operationalize this, and I think that's where some of the discourse is missing in the international decisions on everything that we've spoken about in here, because operationalizing to say operationalize without much guidance, I think it loses some of the value that it can provide. How that's to be done, I really do, going back to what everyone's been saying, it's really a paradigm shift in society. And I think that many of these issues that have been raised with technology, with collecting data, with all of that, it's a fundamental paradigm shift in society and understanding what it is that we need to deal with, how it is that we need to grow, and how it is that we're actually going to shape this world for our children. One of my favorite quotes, I promise this is it. One of my favorite quotes, and I think I'm going to destroy it right now, but I'll try. One of my favorite quotes is, why should we prepare our children for the world the way it is, when in fact we should be preparing children to change that world, right? And so many of these things about the man box, the woman box, whatever we're going to call this, we're putting our children into this box as opposed to helping our children break this box, right? I think that's it.
I think that's a very powerful way to end. Thank you very much. I want to thank you, the audience, for being here, for engaging in the way that you did. And with the kind of probing questions that you did, and I'm assuming you're all going to go away and think about those answers and think about more questions. I think we should also thank the panel for really a very engaging and wide perspective on what is a very complex issue, and I think putting Veronica in particular for putting together this panel. She's sneering, but she really did. And also, I think, in particular, the University of the West Indies for leading this discussion, for taking it on and carrying it forward. And thanking the EU also for helping that process. Goodbye, everybody. Go home.